Yes, ma'am.
It is October 5th, 2020, and you are listening to episode 15 of the Candid Clarinetist podcast. What's going on, everybody? Sam Rothstein here with the Candid Clarinetist podcast. I wanted to take a second at the beginning of this episode to thank you for your continued support and patronage of the Candid Clarinetist podcast. When I started the podcast this past June, I had no idea that it was going to have the impact that it has had so far, and that is all thanks to my loyal listeners. If you haven't already or are new to the podcast, please take a second right now to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, whatever it may be. It only takes a quick second to hit that subscribe button, and this helps the continued growth of the podcast and also has the added benefit to you, the listener, gaining access to new episodes as soon as they are available. If you didn't catch last week's episode, make sure to check it out. My chat with Andrea Levine, principal clarinet of the Louisville Orchestra. She gives great advice on how to be a good colleague when you're invited to play as a guest with another orchestra, and also some tips on how to maybe get your foot in the door if you're just starting out your professional career. Today's episode is going to be all about networking, and I have invited my good friend Steve Hanusofski from the Phoenix Symphony to talk with me about this important topic, and I truly think that he is an expert when it comes to networking with other musicians and clarinetists, and he's laughing because he quite literally knows everybody. So, Steve, thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Sam. It's so great to see you. This is such a great thing you're doing here. This is really going to be great, really fun.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun today. So Steve and I, to sort of preface this and give him some credibility right off the bat, I believe we first met at an audition. I think it was it Seattle? Was that where we first met?
It might have been Seattle, yeah.
Okay, so we met at an audition, and very professionally, I think we played around each other. I don't think we were in the same round, but he saw me, and he had worked with my colleagues in Richmond before. He had played there and known them for a long time. And he just very casually came up to me, hey, I'm Steve. I play in the Phoenix Symphony. Nice to meet you. He said, you're Sam. And I was like, yeah, it's so nice to meet you. I've heard about you. And then after the audition was over, I remember we enjoyed a nice, I think we had oven-fired pizza that night. I don't remember what it was. It was something like that.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
He just invited me for a nice meal, and it was great. So Steve, let's just hit it right off the bat. How do you meet people in this industry? Like, how do you do that?
I guess, I don't know if there's a little bit of an art to it. I think I guess the main ways that I've met people in this industry is, you've mentioned one of them, auditions. Another one is obviously conventions. Another obvious one is that we're dealing with right now is social media. But I think one of actually the most important ways to meet people is just through the connections that we make with other musicians, with friends. And you actually gave a perfect example of a good way to meet someone, in that I had an in because I knew who you were, because we had a shared friend or two, and auditions can be tricky because meeting people at auditions can be tricky because a lot of people they want to go into their space. Some people don't need that. Some people are very focused. And one of the things that I think is important in networking when you're trying to meet people is a thing I call read the room. And so, be aware, like when I've seen people at auditions, and I am kind of a gregarious person. And especially as I've gotten older, as you get older, you sort of just tend to not care about, you tend to lose some of your inhibitions and not worry about what people are going to think about you. And if you're going to make a fool out of yourself. It makes me looking forward
to getting older.
Yeah. It does happen. It takes a while. But that was a good example because sometimes I seriously just enjoy meeting people. It's not even so much about meeting fellow musicians so they can do something for me or so I can have, network. It's just mainly, it's like you can never have enough friends. You can never have people that you have some kind of a shared interest with. And we do an amazing thing. And it's a specialized thing. And it's a very, it actually is a very small world. A friend of mine that speaking of networking, that I work with in the Colorado Music Festival and also the Arizona Music Fest that I work with here, likes to say that the music industry it's not a small world, it's a large room. And so the degrees of separation, it's definitely a lot less than 6. Once you kind of get your foot into the industry, then I think it becomes easier to meet people when you have all these different types of the different things that we do, the different kinds of concerts and things that we do. So we can get into that more of that. But I think those 4 ways: auditions, conventions, social media, and but mostly it's all kind of the best way to meet people is like to have a connection through a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said is like you just like meeting people and getting to know people, because I think, and I had this on my list, but I think a lot of people want to network to get something out of the other person. At least I know you don't, but I know certainly there are times where they're like, I want to network with that person because I think I can get something in return. Whereas you can get stuff in return by just being genuine with people.
I think that's a very good point, and that's one thing that I think is like another word that I like to use. Genuine is a good word. Another word that I like to use is sincere, sincerity, and yeah, and I'll be. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, the majority of the times that I have networked, it has been in a purest sense, like not trying to get something from somebody. I will admit, I have one time that I actually did sort of kind of not necessarily throw my weight around, but just kind of get a little aggressive isn't even the right word, with someone, but it was someone that I actually already knew. It was a conductor that I had a relationship with. I hesitate to say friendship. People don't like to think that you're friends with conductors because of the political implications. And it is possible to have very good working relationships with conductors and still not compromise, and not in a non-political way. And so it was our music director here for a while. I was on our artistic advisory. I was the chair of our artistic advisory committee here in Phoenix off and on for like 20 years. Actually more than that. I'm one of those people that's been on every single committee. The only thing I haven't done is being chair of the orchestra committee, which I will never do. But
you might have dodged a bullet on that one.
I am doing that actually at I got talked into doing it at my music festival, but that's another story. Yeah. But anyway, speaking of my music festival, I kind of got my foot in the door at the Colorado Music Festival because my music director here in Phoenix was also the music director of the Colorado Music Festival. And there were a couple of my colleagues that played there, and everybody kept saying to me, you should come up for a week to Colorado and hang out. It's so cool. It's so awesome. We can drink beer and you can go hiking and blah, 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 blah. So, I kind of put this in the back of my mind, and I noticed that, and I had actually, let me preface this by saying I had actually officially auditioned for that festival a couple of times. So it wasn't like I was just like coming out of nowhere. But I kind of looked at what they were doing, and that summer they were doing the Wagner Ring Without Words that Barenboim put together, which we had actually done in Phoenix the previous season. And so I knew that called for 4 clarinets, and I walked up to my music director and I said, "Hey, how's it going? So I see that you're doing the Ring Without Words this summer. And to my credit, these words came out of my mouth. I said, I don't know what your policy is for hiring extras, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I would love to come up and play if possible. If there's, if I can get a sub there for that week. And he said, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me get back to you. And so the next thing I knew, I got invited to come up and play third clarinet that one week. And it worked out that I follow all the things that Andrea talked about last week about fitting in with the section, and got along with the section really well. And the section at the time was Boris Alacridyne, Lou DiMartino, and oh my gosh, I told you I have senior moments. Michel Montone playing bass. And so we all got along great, just like had a blast. So the next summer, they had 2 weeks that they needed an extra. One of them was Rite of Spring. They needed second bass clarinet. And one of them was Mahler 6. They needed me to play second clarinet. So I got invited to do that. And then that sort of worked into, I ended up getting a position there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And work there now. And that's really the only time that I can think of that I sort of like, and I don't even think there's any, I don't even use the word malice, but I just like, that with approaching it in a very focused sort of way. But to wrap up that is I think you do have a good point in that, I would say that, and I've actually seen this happen, that if you actually try to make connections with the intent of trying to further yourself and get some kind of something out of it, you will be less successful than if you approach it in a way of like, I'm just making this connection, and we find a way that we have something, friends, we like just things that work out. And 9 times out of 10, those are the ones that lead to someone saying, hey, I remember this guy, this woman that I worked with here, blah, blah, blah. They're really cool, or they played really well, or they really like cats, and I really like, just something like that. And that works. So yeah, I think it's, and it's hard to say that, especially in this time that we're living in right now, when I think we really feel like we need to make as many connections as possible. I've had people call me to say, hey, I might need to teach some extra clarinet lessons right now. And with some of them forgetting that I actually am in a position where I might need to teach some clarinet. So,
I think too, like once you establish those relationships, like you said, in a very genuine and honest and sincere way, there is a way of doing like what you did and being like, hey, I'm sure you have a policy, or I'm sure you have, local subs or whatever, but just so you know, like, I'd love to come up and play sometime. It actually, for example, with Andrea, I had contacted her a couple months ago about being on the podcast, and we knew of each other. We weren't, familiar, but we knew of each other. And so we'd been talking, and they announced that our orchestra season was canceled. And so when we were corresponding about the podcast, I was just like, hey, I know you guys are kind of doing some chamber stuff or whatever, but if you ever need anybody, I'd love to come and play. And it was just very like honest but respectful. It wasn't like, hey,
exactly,
you should call me because I'm around and I'm the best player that you can get.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure enough, like a couple weeks ago, she called me because they had some emergency where somebody had been exposed to COVID, and I didn't end up playing because I had to get some like rapid test that wasn't available for me. But it was just, and a lot of times what you said is like, they actually really appreciate that, because a lot of times they just don't think about it because they're so worried about like their own thing. So if you go to some people and you're like, hey, I'm in the area, if you ever need anybody, and a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, great. Especially if they respect you and they know that you're not coming and trying to build a friendship with them, just based on like needing something from them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So, I know that like my wife is a real person and she has a real job. And so I know a lot of real people with real jobs use like LinkedIn. And so I've never really used LinkedIn. And with this whole COVID thing, I actually made like a LinkedIn profile and stuff, and I started perusing it, and it's literally like Facebook for professionals. The vibe is a little different, but so for musicians, like, what do you recommend? And since we live in the age of social media, like, do you recommend connecting with people on Facebook or LinkedIn or social media, or do you prefer email correspondence, or like, what's your kind of go-to method?
Well, I actually have. So I've actually never used LinkedIn, and I mean, in the back in the day, I used to, I had a little business card that I made up, and that I wasn't just like throwing out like candy. I mean, I would ask someone, would you, hey, this was great, great talking with you. Yeah, if you ever want to get in touch, here's my card. And it was very simple. It had my name, it said clarinetist, and it had my phone number and my email.
Perfect.
No fancy drawings or anything, just like very kind of professional looking. And I also, I mean, those come in handy because I mean, I'm kind of, you will note this about me. I will veer and get us back. But because networking just doesn't apply to what we do. It applies to like audiences. It applies to like, board members. It applies donors, stuff like that. Those cards that I made, when I would go hiking in Colorado, I would take a couple with me, and I would meet people because I'm a huge dog person. So if someone has a dog, I walk up and got to play with the dog.
Oh yeah.
So, and I'm just like, I say hello to people. I'm that guy that, like, the mask thing is awful for me because I smile at people. Right. I ask people in coffee shops, how are you doing today? And I'm sincere. I really am sincere about it. Right. And, but I would give people out my card. I would say, hey, I get some free passes to concerts. If you're interested, email me. And you'd be surprised how many I got people, so people would be, and they're almost afraid to do it. They're kind of like, well, I don't know if you remember me. And I'm like, of course I remember you. This is great. and they're like, I mean, I've had people want to buy me things because I gave them free tickets because they think it's the most amazing thing in the world. And it's such an easy thing to do. So, I mean, that's kind of back in the day. I got on Facebook probably in around 2008. And I'm on Instagram. Instagram has been less time. It's probably about 3 years that I've been, 3.5 years I've been on Instagram. I don't know why it took me so long. I actually these days enjoy Instagram better, a little bit more. But I actually have met people a lot on Facebook just by, once again, because that's set up with the whole, what I was talking about earlier about, going through friends. So I would just like request friends, like people who were not just the big names, but just like someone I was like, oh, bass clarinet players, I should know these people, and would just kind of go through, and not like you're stalking or anything. It's just, it's totally valid just to kind of reach out. And if they're interested, they'll reach back. And if not, and, I've actually made some connections that way. I've made connections also with people in other industries, or other Broadway, some filmmakers, just things like that, things that I'm interested in. Yeah. And that I just kind of go like, oh yeah, someone has this project. I've met people by contributing $50 to their Kickstarter program. And it's interesting because you can make connections that way, because especially when you get to like music theater, there's some bleed over in what we do. But it's just great to have all these people because it really is a network, and it's amazing how these things all cross. Mm-hmm. I've actually gotten this Broadway singer. I actually got him a performance with my orchestra, just by recommending him, which turned into our audience and our administration loving him so much. We brought him in to sing Tony on our stage version of West Side Story, and then they loved him so much that they built a whole solo show around him. Cool. the next guy. And this guy's got chops. He's,
Yeah.
he was in Book of Mormon and Sweeney
Mhm.
Todd, and but this is just someone that I randomly, met because of a shared interest, and I recognized this talent, and I thought, okay, well, this is a great way to do it. And this is one other thing I wanted to mention about networking is that it's sort of a tired phrase, but paying it forward, just sort of and sort of broadening your horizons into, networking can also be you helping other people network.
Yep.
I don't know if that's necessarily paying it forward, but just, I have friends that I don't hesitate to say okay, I know you're looking for this. I have here's 5 names.
Mm-hmm.
Give that, and that stuff, it does kind of, even if it doesn't come back on you in some way, where you get something out of it, it just feels good.
Yeah.
And it's there's only so many positions in the orchestra industry that we have, and a lot of people that are very talented, and I like to get as many people involved as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. So yeah, I don't use LinkedIn, but I do use social media, and then I also contacts with friends.
Yeah. That's awesome, Steve. And I like that you started off with well, I just like meeting people in person. Like I just like walking by and saying, "Hey, I'm Steve. I'm a clarinetist."
Yeah.
What are you about? And it's interesting that you said too that you like to help other people network. And I've been doing a lot of this recently, just because of the uncertainty of everything. And I've had a chance and an opportunity to sort of explore my other interests. And for example, this afternoon I was having a Zoom meeting with this gentleman. He works in sports production, and because I've always been interested in that, and I think that from my standpoint, I would never. I can't think of any unless I was busy and I couldn't do it. Never think of a circumstance where I would say, no, I won't have coffee with you, or I won't meet over Zoom for 15 minutes to just chat about what I do. And I'm sure you're the same way. I mean, we all just like to talk, and and so I've been having a lot of those meetings. So I think just don't be shy in terms of reaching out to people that you might just say, hey, my name's Sam. I admire what you do. I'd love to have a chat about it. And the worst thing that could happen is you don't get an email back.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you said that, because that was another point I was going to make, is that do not be afraid to reach out to people. Do not be afraid to. I mentioned conductors before, and I saw Andrea's session with you, and
Mm-hmm.
I remember the thing she talked about with conductors, where when you're subbing, don't make a beeline to the conductor's
Right.
podium. And yes, I agree with that. An exception to that might be if it just happens to be that it's a conductor that you worked with at Tanglewood, or there are minor exceptions to that, but most of the time you don't want it. But once again, that's a lot of times when people are making that beeline, they're making it for a reason.
Right.
And I prefer to because I've had those situations where I have friends. Sorry, I'm rambling here for a bit. I have some friends who want to have no interactions with conductors at all. They like to, in fact, they prefer that they are anonymous. And
Yes.
unfortunately, we're not anonymous when we're playing in an orchestra. And I mean, some of this comes with my experience, because I've been in the business for about 36 years now. And I mean, with experience, you start to feel, you can feel less inclined to tread lightly. Although I think you still should.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be honest, I'm at the point in my career now where some of the conductors I'm playing with, were not born when I started in this industry.
Right.
And so, we're orchestra musicians. We all know it's the unspoken thing that we know more than most conductors about a lot of things, or at least how an orchestra works. So as I just got older, I didn't have a problem like like asking a question, or even early on, there's conductor James DePriest, and I think it was my third year here in Phoenix. He came, and it was the first time I played under him, and we did this really awesome program. It was this is my weird memory I was mentioning to you when we were off camera here.
Sure.
We did this was like 1989, so we did the Fauré Pallias and Melisande, Walton Viola Concerto, which I love, and Sibelius 1. And that Sibelius 1, that performance was sort of one of, I would put that in one of my top 10 moments. That moment when it opens up on the last page and it just started, and the orchestra is spreading like this, and all of a sudden opens up into E major. I mean, it was just, every night we did it, you just kind of went, okay, I want to have a cigarette after this. This is like amazing. And I made sure that I engaged with him. And I actually had a question to ask him, because I was playing something. There was something in the bass clarinet part on the Walton, and I had a question for him. So I was like, oh, Mr. DePriest, Maestro, nice to meet you, blah 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 blah, and he engaged with me because I had a reason to be up there. I wasn't just trying to meet with him, and he ended up. I actually ended up, like, shortly after that, auditioning for Oregon Symphony, because he was music director then, and didn't get the position. But then fast forward to about 11 years later, our music director at the time became seriously ill, and for a season, DePriest was our acting principal guest, and he remembered me from all of that time back, just from just making those little connections. And so I want to go. I mean, I say don't be afraid, but I really go back to it's how you do it. It's how you approach it with sincerity, and I mean, even sometimes it's having a shared, knowing that you have some kind of a shared interest about something, and saying oh, hey, it's a bad example, but hey, I love those pictures of your dog on Instagram. Yeah, you can do that stuff like that, and it's amazing how people when you kind of get out of all the nuts and bolts of what we do, and you start interacting like people, then that can actually, that opens doors that later on, those are the people they remember, because conductors, I mean, our big artists, or even in the, Ricardo or somebody like that, big name in an orchestra, they have so many people coming up to them to do, they have instrument people coming up. They have reed people coming up to them to endorse stuff. They have people wanting lessons. They have people just wanting I just want to touch your robe, that kind of stuff. And and if you just actually treat them like a person and interact with them, it's amazing.
Yeah.
The connections you make.
Yeah, that's super cool. And let's dovetail onto this. So I know you are a regular attendee of the ICA conferences. Obviously not this year, because no one could go this year, but I distinctly remember the one time I went when it was in Kansas. You flew in on the last day just to come in and try everything, and then you flew out.
Oh, that was yes.
That's
actually
great.
the last one I was at. That was actually the last one I was at. Yeah, I had gone to a couple of conventions when I was younger, and then I hadn't gone for a long time, and I remember I remember because this is going to segue right into how the person who we know each other through is it was the summer of 2005, and I needed something, because Phoenix's season is it's varied over the years I've been here, but it's around 38 weeks. Okay. And so that means it's like I say it's like a teacher. We have 3 months off, and except for one year where I subbed in 1999, I subbed for the summer in Santa Fe Opera, and the next year I actually was a member of the Eastern Music Festival, and I unfortunately gave that up for personal reasons. And then it wasn't until I started doing Colorado Music Festival in about 2010, I think is when that happened, that I did anything in the summer. So all those other decades I was here, I was sitting in this god awful heat in the summer. And so that summer 2005, I thought, I need something. I need some inspiration. I need something to do. And I came upon the Oklahoma Clarinet Symposium.
Yes.
And had never been before. And I was just doing some research, and I went, you know what? This is a couple days. This sounds great. I want to go do this. And I went there, and I had a great time. And I really missed that. I mean, I not to badmouth, and I'm not badmouth is a bad choice of words, but the conventions. But I really love the symposium because it was just smaller. Mm-hmm. And my buddy Francois Clock, who you also had mm-hmm. on, who I networked with at the Oklahoma Clarinet Symposium, not that year, but another year. We talked about this, about how like he loved that more than going to the conventions, because he says at that symposium, there was usually only one thing going on at once. Mm-hmm. And you could actually take time to interact with people, which is hard to do at the big convention, especially when you're part of the big corporations there. Yeah. So I went, I did that, and I met a very dear friend, Jared, and just kind of networking, met yep. him, and we hit it off. And the next thing I knew, the next year, both of us had been offered for the next symposium. Both of us got offered recitals. Cool. And to play, and then we actually met and hung out at that was one, I think, 2005, 2006. That was one of the Minnesota Orchestra. That might have been assistant principal audition or something like that. Yeah. And so we met up there, and went out. I think he passed on, I didn't. The next day we went out and had beer. Mm-hmm. It was great. And then we were friends, and so then there came an opportunity for they needed a fourth player in Richmond, and this was to play. And you'll find this very funny. I think we've talked about this, but it was this is when Ralph was there, mm-hmm. was principal, and they needed a bass clarinet player for Prokofiev 5. Which we've played together in Richmond. Right. So I went there and played, and that's how I met Ralph. Sherry Hoffman was another one that she played second clarinet there, and I'd actually met her at the San Francisco Opera audition for principal, and that Jared and she and I and Ralph, I think, was in the finals for that. Mm-hmm. And when we didn't pass on, we all went and ran around San Francisco, and because I love San Francisco. I'd been a lot, and so Sherry was like, "Where do we go?" And I said, "Okay, we're gonna go here. We're gonna have cookies here. We're gonna have pizza here. We're gonna do the blah blah." And so anyway, that's how I got my networking got me a gig in Richmond, and mm-hmm. then probably 4 years later, I think, is when you were there. And I came back, and we played the exact same piece. Yeah, but you played E flat this time. I played E flat that time, because I do that. I do all that stuff. Yeah. But yeah. So I'm getting off the convention here thing. But so I loved that. I loved the symposium. Yeah. And I went every year until David passed away and it had to shut down. Yeah. But then I thought, well, I should start going to the ICA conventions. Mm-hmm. And so for a while there, I went to every one I didn't go overseas, but all the ones that were in the States. And so I was doing that. And boy, I mean, like I was performing. I was I would say that these last 15 years, especially with social media, that was really like taken off, where I've met the most people I have in my career. Yeah. And, a lot of them through that. I mean, I'm buddies with Francois Clock. I met Greg Radin. I'm thinking of all the people that have been on your podcast. I knew Ralph. I met Heather and Alcides. Mm-hmm. I had actually met Alcides before I met Jared, because Alcides played in the Jacksonville Symphony.
Right.
And I was friends with Peter Wright, who was the principal there. And so I had met Alcides, but then I met Heather and his wife.
So if our
at
listeners haven't
Oklahoma.
been able to tell here, Steve, like I said, knows everybody. So listen to his networking advice. And it's funny that you mentioned Francois Clark, because actually when he and I first met him at that Kansas ICA, because I did a concert with Laurie and his students, and we met up afterwards. And obviously Laurie's a pretty high up in the buffet artist
Yes.
hierarchy, I guess. It's not really a hierarchy, but he's one of their feature artists for sure. And he introduced me to Francois, and a couple of years later I was a buffet artist. So super important conventions. And also having this podcast, I am really looking forward to the first ICA that I can attend. I have some really awesome ideas for what I can do at those with the podcast.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that. That'll be really fun. But yeah, so for those who don't know, the Oklahoma Symposium, it's now defunct, right? It hasn't happened probably since like the early 2010s. Is that correct?
No, I want to say David. So it was his last year. He became very ill, unfortunately. It was awful. I mean, what a wonderful person, and he'd done this thing for 35 years, but he became seriously ill, and it was the same summer that the ICA was in Austin, at UT Austin. So it was that summer. And then he passed away. So the woman who took over him, which I'm having a senior moment to remember who it is, but who took over at OU, she had it the next year. She tried to keep it going.
Yeah.
But if any of you know anything about these conventions, they are huge undertakings.
Yes.
And even just that 1 week, even without the vast scale of some of these conventions, just that one weekend in Oklahoma took a year of planning, and and David had that down to an art, and it became a little bit too much for them to do after that, because it sort of dropped off. I remember going the year after that, and a lot of people had, the attendance was really down, and then it just became like sort of untenable to keep it going, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Because it was really a great thing, but yeah. So and I want to say it was probably around 2013, maybe when it was the last one.
I figured it was right around that time. But the ICA conventions are excellent. You can meet everybody there. I mean, lots of great artists, lots of great concerts, lots of great vendors. So highly recommend those. They're usually midsummer, usually July, August sometimes. So if you have a chance, check them out. The ICA conventions, great place to meet people. So what do you think the biggest value is in networking in the clarinet world, aside from like getting work?
Well, I think it's I kind of what we've been talking about here is I think it's about just maintaining really good relationships with with your colleagues, but you're not just necessarily your colleagues in your work sphere, but just your colleagues in the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really, well, I think actually one of the value is a big value for me is that ability to like connect people. So because part of what I said, networking is like helping other people out. And I mean, there had so many times where I've put people who did not know each other together, just to say like, okay, I know this works and that works, and like you guys should know each other,
right?
And and I think I think it's just the value of it. Just like it also just helps make everything that we do that much better. Just a bit, just makes like if it is work, it makes the work experience that much better. Just having because it goes outside of clarinetists. I mean, I have like I know a lot of flute players. I know a lot of bassoon players, and uh, just, I mean, just being able to connect to all these different parts of our industry is amazing. And I mean, what wouldn't be valuable about that?
Yeah. And I think too that, I mean, when I was younger and when we were all younger, I think that music was kind of it was a little bit of a competitive thing in a way, where there was all these competitions. This person got first chair, this person got, and when you get older and you start to learn more about the people behind it, everyone's just super cool and they're just great people,
Yeah.
And so I just like getting to know people like yourself and like Francois, just like all these people that I've had on my show. A lot of them I just hadn't known that well, and it's just nice to get to know people. And there's a lot of just great, amazing people behind who they are as clarinetists. And I think that you're proving this point is like it's just great to connect people and just, like you said, who wouldn't want to do that? So I think that's really fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, and part of sort of and your point there also is that, yeah, I mean, it's sort of the way things are set up is that, I mean, with the whole audition,
Yeah.
the way that which sometime I have lots of thoughts about auditions.
We all do, for sure.
How they are possibly the least efficient way to hire somebody, but at least the way they're set up now. But it's all set up to be very competitive. But then once you get into what we do, if you're in the orchestra world, it's a team sport.
Yep.
I mean, there are very, if you think about it, well, and I don't want to digress too much here, but like, I mean, one of my issues, especially as I've judged auditions and not just for clarinet, for other things, for wind instruments particularly, is that a lot of times I feel like we test, because it's a test.
Yeah.
We test the wrong things. So, like you take a principal clarinet audition, you're going to play all the big clarinet solos, all the big moments. And you might play some Daphnis. So that's that's kind of an ensemble thing. But most things are, well, and also I'm one of those people who's of the school that the Mendelssohn Scherzo is not about articulation. It's an ensemble excerpt.
Yeah.
But, Mendelssohn Scottish Symphony, another one. That's that one. The second clarinet players who took our auditions probably hate me because I was the one that that was a very deciding factor for a lot of
Gotcha.
It's like, but if you think about it in the overall scale of things, how many times, unless you're the concert master, maybe principal oboe, I mean, how many times, in the percentage-wise, do you play a solo? It's not. It's
2%, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if we
1%.
said 20, that would be saying, yeah, And so most of the time, it's like, and what makes an orchestra work is, I mean, it's a unit. It's a thriving, this beast but it has to work together. I mean, one of the reasons Berlin is such a great orchestra is, I mean, they all play chamber music.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the bass clarinet player has played chamber music with one of the string bass players that's sitting across the orchestra, and they can't help but just think, and not think that they think globally, not locally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's networking.
Yeah.
It's it's building and reinforcing our team.
Yeah, absolutely. So cool. So it's not just networking with fellow musicians, right? Because we happen to be in an industry that is very reliant on patrons and very reliant on donations. We work in a nonprofit organizations. And so I feel like networking with patrons and donors is incredibly important, particularly in the time we live in now, but certainly even when the orchestra season is going on, I always make a point to, get to know our donors and get to know our patrons and sort of, take down the curtain between both the physical and the the proverbial curtain between the audience and the orchestra. So what do you do in terms of networking with your donors and your patrons?
Well, one of the first things that I did, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a prerequisite for this type of interaction, but I got connected with with several donors and board members and even audience members through being on various committees in the orchestra, and especially particularly board members. But then that would sort of lead to donors, and but I mean, once you've kind of broken that seal, it becomes easier to do. And well, let me give you an example of and let me step back and say that it does help. I think in the same way that we've talked about, like, not approaching someone with the intent of, what are you going to do for me? Not a donor to, like, are you going to give money to my organization?
Right. Give us more money.
It's finding things that you have in common, or just like, or also just not being afraid to talk to people, because they are people. And if you're, if your orchestra happens to throw some kind of event where people are mingling and stuff like that, don't be afraid.
Yep.
Don't be a dork and an idiot, but I mean, still don't be afraid to, like, because they with some exceptions, they are people also.
Right.
And you kind of have to, because I think people are just a lot of times afraid to just go up there. They feel like, well, I'm not this, I'm not that. They're not going to talk to me. It's like, okay, if they don't, they're lost. Right. So, so I have sort of a cute example of how my chair in the Phoenix Symphony it is the Solon-Esther Drescher-Molzit chair. Solon-Esther Drescher chair that was done by Susan and Mark Molzit. Mark, I think, was at one point like a part owner of the Phoenix Suns or something like that. We're talking about 25 years ago. Susan, one of the people who endowed my chair, was on our board of directors. And so I had met her at a luncheon where our executive director at the time had, like, invited me, because at that point I was starting to kind of get a reputation for being
cool guy.
Yeah, someone who wasn't afraid to, like, talk with donors and talk with audience people, and so we'll say cool guy. I'll go with that.
Yeah, we'll take that.
I'll take that. But and we just had this great conversation. I would say it was me and the ladies who lunch at this one thing, sitting at a table, and I just was working my charms, and so then fast forward to she and her husband hosted this event at their house, which is it's like massive. Yeah, there's a tennis court. Right.
What are those houses?
And we actually did, like, there was a group of about 10 of us that played, like, for some donors who were there for an event, and we played on the tennis court. And I remember playing. I didn't even tell you when I played. I played the Jean Arabesques.
Very nice.
The little piano there, and did my little thing. Okay, so then, and there was they were having, like, a little luncheon, and there was an open bar, and I walked up to the bar, and Mark, her husband, this rich guy, he was bartending, and we were chatting, and he was like, "Oh yeah, what do you like?" And he had this bottle of 18-year-old Macallan Scotch sitting up there, and I said, "So, can I have some of that?" And he was like, and he looked at me, he said, "You like Macallan?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And I wasn't lying. I actually did. I never had an 18-year-old, but I thought, because I can afford it. But so we sort of bonded in that 5 minutes over us having this liking Macallan Scotch. The next thing that happened is that a couple weeks later, our executive director called me, and she said, "So Mark and Susan have endowed your chair."
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
And and I mean, like, and all I did was just, like, be a dude.
Yeah.
Just, like, interact with them.
See, I thought you were going to say they sold that bottle of scotch and then endowed your chair with the money that they've.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what they did. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, I've met people that way, and I've met audience members. I think it's great. I mean, like, audiences, you go out, you just go out in the during intermissions. You can meet people, and I've been because as you can tell, I'm not afraid to talk.
Yeah.
So I've been tagged quite a few times to give curtain speeches,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, I mean, and I just kind of like walk and I, figure out jokes and they laugh. And so people have gotten to know me sort of as this figure. And I just, so like I said earlier, I, with sincerity ask people in coffee shops, like, how are you doing? How's your day going? I do the same thing. I walk through the the front part of the auditorium at an intermission or before, and I'll just like, hey, how's it going? Just like, and being it sort of takes some of the mystery away. You're not this like thing that's up. Well, we have a proscenium stage too, so it's even worse. So it's like we're
far away
on the proscenium. Yeah, we're not in the midst of the audience. So. Yeah, but I mean, I think it's very important to do that. It's very important to do that because, especially in the time, I mean, right now when we need our audiences to be, gunning for us, or not gunning for us is the wrong word, but supporting us, vouching for us. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's so great here to see how people are just like they cannot wait to see us again,
right?
And I believe that. I mean, I believe that, and so it's great. I mean, I think that's very important. I think it's very important to not just network with our own, but to broaden the family.
Absolutely, and I loved everything that you said there. But I think that. If I had any piece of advice, I would say just don't be that person who just like, you see people looking at you afterwards and pointing at you and looking at your instrument in awe, especially kids. Don't be afraid to just go say hi and just, you don't have to like duck away and jump off stage as soon as possible and avoid all contact. Like just engage with people because they're never going to forget that. And that's the thing is like, because to you or to them, you are a rock star. Especially kids, like they think you're so cool. And if you go and say hi to them or take a picture with them or talk to them about your instrument, they will remember that probably for the rest of their lives. And that's totally worth it. And their parents are going to remember it. And it's just going to be a great thing. So don't be the person who just kind of shuns away from all engagement. Make sure you stay engaged with your audience as well as obviously your other colleagues.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm at a point in my career, I've been doing it long enough, but I think you're probably getting to this point too, where you've probably had people come up to you and comment about that or say like, I remember years ago when, you came up and said hello to my son who, now he plays maybe not the clarinet, but now he plays the French horn and he's going to USC. And it's, right. It's like, it's because you really, I'm here to tell you, I mean, you have to get a few years in and be able to get some distance from it. But I'm here to tell you, those connections are huge. They have, I mean, what could be the most minor thing for you, just to like spend 5 minutes, just like showing someone your instrument, or just having a kid or an adult say like, just ask you a question, and it's amazing. Like we really have no idea. And it's the networking thing, because it's like you plant a seed and then it grows somewhere. And so yeah, I would absolutely say that those are as important as the connections we make within our industry.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Steve. Before you leave, do you have any last words, shout outs, pieces of advice, or words of wisdom? I always give my guests a chance to just stand on a soapbox if they so choose.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time. And it's been great. And I mean, I've done a lot of things, and I think a lot of it is because I haven't been afraid to open myself up to the experience outside of what we do, of meeting people, of being genuinely interested in not just the clarinet. I mean, I know that on one of your break the ice things that you did with one of the earlier podcasts, you asked about favorite pieces, and one of my favorite pieces, actually, I would say, or desert island pieces, maybe at least two of them do not involve the clarinet at all.
Right.
One of them is music for strings, percussion, and celesta, and the other one is the Bach Goldberg variations. And and I could spend my life listening to those two pieces. I think they're amazing. Pulcinella is a solid choice. Petrushka, I love Petrushka. That's one I could live with. But but to be open to everything, because it's I like to think. I think it's my buddy. I can call him a buddy, which is great. Bert Haro. I met Bert at an audition. Here's a quick story. When he won his first job, which was Alabama Symphony, I was in the finals with him for that. And there was a whole, I won't tell it now, but there was a whole thing that went on that ended up with him and some of the other finalists sleeping on the floor in the hotel room that my roommate and I had got there because the audition went so late.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And us having beer and pizza and stuff like that. And I've known Bert. That was like 1984. And and I've known him for all these years. And I mean, I think I can attribute this to him. I love that he says, he wants to be remembered not as a great clarinetist, but as a great musician. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's like, that's what you want to do. And I think this kind of, opening yourself up to knowing and being involved and helping other people along their paths in what we do is part of that, being that total amazing, a musician, which is not just reeds and not just all the nuts and bolts that we put in and not all the excerpts that we play and stuff like that, but it's everything that comes together and how that works. And and I can't encourage people enough to just reach out. Don't be afraid. Reach out to people, reach out to friends on Broadway, or they need help now too, or just I've gotten in to see shows through friends.
Yeah, for sure.
I met on Facebook because we just had a friend in common, and I think I just think it's great. I also, real quickly, I don't even know so much that it's networking, but I mean, I feel like I am where I am even before I started kind of networking. We share, I would say we share a teacher, although I really only had one lesson with him, and that's Laurie Bloom. And when I went to school in Chicago, but I didn't go to Northwestern. I went to North Park College, which is really small. I think it's called North Park University now. But I studied with Marcellus and Clark Brody, and that was right around the time that Laurie. Right, that was right around my first year. Was the first year that Larry Combs became principal, and so John was there. Laurie was there, and I actually, fun fact, you may or may not know this, the job I have right now was Laurie's first job. Yep,
I did know that, yes.
And because I remember when I first got it, Chicago came through that first year to play at Gamage, and we were laughing about that. But when I started graduate school at Florida State with Fred Ormond, after one of the first concerts, I got assigned to play contra alto clarinet on the Henza clarinet concerto. And I had never, at that point, I probably had held a bass clarinet in my hand maybe 3 times in my entire life. Okay. And so I dutifully went to and got the contra alto. It was one of those big rosewood LeBlanc ones.
Oh yeah.
And the joke that I make with people now is that I made the mistake of doing a good job.
Yes.
Because then for 3 years at Florida State, I was pegged. Steve was the bass clarinet guy.
Yeah.
And so Fred showed me a few things on bass clarinet, and then because I still had connections to Chicago and actually was going to spend spring break with my friends from my undergraduate friends from school, he said, you should get a lesson with Laurie Bloom. And so I dragged a bass clarinet on spring break up to Chicago and had my one bass clarinet lesson with Laurie Bloom. And but it changed my life because I have I have a career because I played the bass clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was in the finals for several jobs, but I mean, it was like my two orchestra jobs or full-time jobs that I've held were bass clarinet jobs.
Yeah.
And then even E flat, like I never had an E flat lesson, but like I play E flat everywhere now. And I, you know, played in all these places just because of, and just that one little thing where Fred had this connection and sent me, you know, just, and I made that connection with Lori, and it was great. So, I mean, these little things that we do, it can really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's a great note to end on, Steve, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I guess it's tonight for me. It's this evening for you, since we're on opposite sides of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the world, the country. Sometimes it feels like a world. But for our new listeners out there, please make sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram at The Candid Clarinetist, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/The Candid Clarinetist. If you haven't checked out our new website, I would also encourage you to do so at candidclarinetistpodcast.com. You can find links to everything I just talked about at the website, on the website. Once again, I am Sam Rothstein, and thanks for tuning in to The Candid Clarinetist podcast. Sweet, Steve.